If you enjoy scary stories, give this video a like and subscribe to the channel.
I don't have a brother. There are no normal people who, walking through life, don't carry with them a bundle of bitter regrets about what they have done or failed to do. It's considered normal, and I'm not going to argue with that. If you meet someone who doesn't regret a single thing they've done, my advice to you is this: run as fast as you can. My burden of regrets, as you will soon see, is exceedingly heavy. I'll tell you about one thing I did as a child. It still weighs on me to this day. Perhaps I won't achieve anything by presenting it for your judgment, but I hope it might make someone feel a little better when they realize how much more terrible the mistakes of others can be. You see, I don't have a brother. However, in August 1991, I still had a brother. Every summer, our parents would send us, the kids, to the deep countryside, to Grandma's village on my mother's side, for at least a month. They justified it as a necessity for us to enjoy the gifts of nature and fresh air. In reality, it was simpler. They just wanted to get rid of us and take a break themselves. These trips left me with mixed impressions. Of course, there were many good and interesting moments. Kids can always find something to entertain themselves with in a village. You know this well. However, the feeling of a carefree summer was severely marred by Grandma. I write this word with a capital letter, not just out of respect. Our grandma was as far removed as possible from the image of a kind, fairy tale-like old lady who bakes pies and tells bedtime stories. Frankly speaking, and I realize this even more clearly as the years pass, Grandma was a disgusting, half-crazy, spiteful hag who had driven her quiet and compliant husband to his grave. I barely remember our grandpa. My brother, being 3 years older than me, remembered him much better and always spoke warmly of him. Perhaps this was why Grandma, who treated me with relative tolerance, openly despised my brother. It's hard for me to understand the selfish position of our parents, who year after year left us in the care of this old and unwell woman. Oh, they were well aware of her character, especially our father. But whenever we protested, the response was always the same. Oh, stop exaggerating. Obey Grandma, she's old. Don't upset her. I was terrified of Grandma to the point of trembling. That summer, my brother and I were 9 and 12 years old, respectively. Michael, being the elder, was responsible for looking after me, so we spent almost all our time together. There weren't many kids our age in the village, so we made do with the games we invented ourselves. Building a tree house in the forest behind the house, playing pirates on a homemade raft, stealing raspberries from the neighbor's garden, the traditional boyish set of adventures. Grandma imposed a very strict daily routine, and heaven forbid we break it. For context, she wasn't shy about using a switch if we were even a minute late to the table, didn't perform her chores in the garden quickly enough, or went where we shouldn't, which she inevitably found out about from gossiping neighbors. Where you shouldn't was practically anywhere. The forest, the highway, the big ravine, the neighboring village, the abandoned cow barns, the rural shop at the crossroads, and, of course, the river. Every evening we spun tales for her about how innocently we had spent the day, holding hands, strolling through the meadow, and picking wild strawberries. "Well, you little rascals," she'd rasp, squinting at us. "I'll find out if you're lying." Life went on as usual until one day we were lucky enough to find a cave. For 2 days in a row, it rained almost nonstop. The Adventures of Tom Sawyer had been read to the end, and the tiny black and white TV showed mostly static, no matter how much you fiddled with the wire stuck into the antenna socket. Exploring the same attic for the 100th time wasn't interesting, and our attempt to build a swing by throwing a rope over a ceiling beam was firmly suppressed by Grandma. Being in the same small house with her was almost physically unbearable. So, as soon as the clouds cleared, we burst outside, yelling with joy. We got scolded for yelling and were sent off to the devil since the wet garden didn't need watering. Taking a roundabout path, constantly fearing surveillance, we reached a wide ravine overgrown with fierce nettles, where a tree had once fallen long ago. This tree and the danger of stinging yourself by falling into the ravine provided obvious entertainment. The entire village was situated on a high, truly very high hill, steeply dropping toward the river. The ravine sloped gently in the same direction and was, in some places, at least 10 meters deep. At its bottom, you'd find cool shade, a murmuring stream, inevitable scratches, nettle burns, and swarms of mosquitoes. One side of the ravine was remarkable for its swallow nest. That's where we headed, first along the slippery trunk of the tree and then, risking our necks even more, under the sandy edge of the cliff dotted with burrow-like nests. For some time, we tried to peer into the nest. We found the skeleton of a chick, but then a flock of shrieking seagulls suddenly attacked us, diving at our heads and brushing our hair and faces with their wings. Startled by the bird's aggression, I made a wrong move and tumbled down with a scream. When Michael carefully climbed down to me, grabbing onto bushes and grass, I was already examining my discovery, forgetting about a dozen fresh scratches in my torn t-shirt. Part of the clay slope, I had rolled down to about its middle, had slid under its own weight, revealing a narrow horizontal crevice just half a meter long. It was dark inside the crevice. A draft blew out of it. Perhaps the crevice had always been there, but it was more likely that the 2-day rain had caused the landslide. A great find for young explorers. We dug into the soil until dinner and widened the crevice enough for me to crawl inside. Almost immediately, the cave opened into a sort of chamber, a grotto with walls of cold, damp clay where one could sit comfortably. There wasn't much light, but I could make out a narrow passage that seemed to lead further in and turn a corner. Washing up at the outdoor pump, Michael and I swore not to tell a single soul about our discovery. It's hard to convey the thrill of being pioneers. On top of that, we now had the most secret hideout in the world. This summer promised to be exciting. For 2 weeks, we enjoyed our secret while deceiving Grandma. We had a flashlight that charged from an outlet and digging tools, old hose, and a trowel, cunningly stolen from the shed. Every day, under strict secrecy, we slipped into the coolness of the cave. In the entrance grotto, we organized our base, stocked some food, leveled the floor and covered it with cardboard, and carved shelves and niches into the walls for a couple of candles bought from the nearest rural store. Our main goal was to find out where the cave ended. There was definitely another exit since the draft was undeniable proof of it. From the grotto, a narrow, winding tunnel led further. Initially, it was more than wide enough for a boy, but as it went on, it narrowed. We crawled through it one after the other. There was only one flashlight, which was handed to whoever crawled first that day. Slowly, we expanded the tunnel, venturing further each day. Progress was slow. We managed about a meter or a meter and a half per day, painstakingly pushing the dug-up clay back behind us. Then we had to crawl back in reverse, feet first, which was even harder. The width of the tunnel barely exceeded the width of our shoulders, making it extremely difficult to even breathe deeply, let alone wield a trowel. Several times one of us got stuck in this burrow, which terrified us. But each time, wiggling and pushing off with outstretched hands, lowering our arms along our sides was impossible, and there was nothing to grab onto. We managed to retreat, and the digging and widening of the tunnel continued. The difficulties did not deter us. We meticulously mapped out the explored path on a double notebook sheet and whispered about plans for the next day at night. Overall, the cave curved to the right as if it wanted to return to the ravine and descended downward. We encountered one branch, but it ended in a dead end, a collapse, just a couple of meters from the main passage. Our speleological pursuits continued until one day, Michael, breathing heavier than usual behind me, said in a muffled voice, "Wait, I'm stuck. Perhaps I bear some responsibility for what happened. I was leading that day, and we were about 18 meters from the cave's entrance. I was so eager to quickly get through a tricky section with rocks that I didn't properly widen the tunnel in that spot and crawled ahead myself. Michael, he was bigger than me. He got stuck in the narrow section and couldn't do anything, nothing at all. We didn't panic right away, but when after an hour, Michael still couldn't move even a centimeter forward or back. Despite trying all our tricks, his voice took on hysterical tones, and I tried to sniffle quietly. After 3 hours, it was far past midday outside. We were both crying uncontrollably and screaming for help at the top of our lungs, utterly pointless at such a depth. I begged Michael to try once more to grab my leg so I could pull him forward, but he screamed that it hurt, that he was suffocating. He begged me to help him. I tried to shine the flashlight on him, but I couldn't even turn around to look at him. We were both flattened under the earth, and now the idea of exploring the cave didn't seem like such a good one anymore. At some point, in a frantic attempt to escape the grip of the tunnel, he twisted his body slightly and got stuck completely, blocking the way back for me too. We were trapped, and no one knew where we were. Michael was the older one, after all. Trying to calm himself down, he explained his plan to me. Our only way out was for me to crawl forward and reach the second exit, then call for help. There was, frankly, no other option, though the chances of success were slim. But I had the trowel and the flashlight, and the tunnel ahead, as far as the light reached, seemed to widen slightly. We agreed to call out to each other every minute, and I began to crawl forward, wriggling like an earthworm. Panic and despair blurred my memories. I only remember crawling, endlessly crawling forward, tearing my hands, knees, and clothes. Michael's shouts from the darkness behind me grew quieter and quieter until they turned into muffled, echoing wails. I was hoarse and stopped trying to call back. Ahead, I saw light. I emerged from the ground, scattering clumps of wet dirt at the very bottom of the same ravine, near its start, next to a stream and a pile of garbage that locals had been throwing down for years. Crying with relief, I struggled to my feet and looked at myself. Terrible. I needed to hurry for help. But where? And what would Grandma say? She'd kill me. Kill us both completely. Raising my tear-blurred eyes, I saw Grandma's head above the edge of the ravine. She was staring right at me, filthy and miserable, having broken all her rules. And oh, how angry her eyes were. Shocked, I lost consciousness. When I opened my eyes, I saw the darkening sky above me. We had missed dinner. My whole body ached, and that was when I realized that I simply couldn't. There was no way I could tell Grandma. Of course, it was just my imagination that I'd seen her up there. What we had done and what had happened. Yes, I'm a coward, a terrible coward, but the mere thought of confessing made me feel sick. I've already mentioned how much I feared her. Now you understand just how much. My God, I was just a frightened child, though of course these are all just cheap excuses. As I washed alone under the water pump, I swore to myself that tomorrow I would rescue my brother on my own. Where's your brother? The creaky, rusty, hinge-like voice was calm and strangely cold. Not a word about my appearance or my lateness. I hunched my shoulders. I don't know. We had a fight and went our separate ways. Hasn't he come back yet? A pathetic, obvious lie. Not yet. Wash your hands and eat. There's a plate on the table. Nothing more was said. I tossed and turned in bed, imagining my brother trapped there, buried alive in the cold ground. I had nightmares. The next morning, I was given work in the garden. There was no escaping it. I collected Colorado potato beetle larvae in a jar under Grandma's heavy, unblinking gaze from her chair on the porch. Only after noon did I manage to sneak away and ran across the gardens to the ravine. As soon as I crawled into the grotto, I heard wailing and moaning. I called out to my brother and climbed toward him, reaching his sneakers. God, he was so happy to see me. He asked when help would come, why it was taking so long, whether the adults had gathered with shovels, and something about a rope. Michael was talking nonstop, laughing and tapping his feet. He had already spent a full day and night in the tunnel, alone in complete darkness. Stammering, I explained to him that help wasn't coming yet. Or rather, it was, but I was the help. I'd get him out myself. I even had a charged flashlight. He was silent for a while, then kicked me in the face. I crawled backward and tried to convince him as best as I could that this was for the best. He agreed. He didn't have much of a choice. I dug at the dirt this way and that, ran to grab a long hoe, and dragged him by the legs amidst his terrible screams of pain. I tried entering from the other side, through the stream exit, and when we finally faced each other, he spat at me. I dug under his chest, told him to exhale, and pulled. I brought him candles and matches, so his cave, yes, by then I was already calling it his cave, would have light. After all, I took the flashlight back with me. I brought Michael water and a couple of apples and later started sneaking food from Grandma's kitchen. But I never managed to get him out. Not that day, nor in the days that followed. On the second day of my attempts to save my brother, he swore he would kill me as soon as he got out. He described in detail how he'd break my fingers one by one and use his pocket knife to gouge out my eyes. I cried, and so did he. I kept digging, but my strength wasn't enough. "Help me!" he screamed. "Help me!" Crawling out feet first to make it back in time for dinner, I could hear my brother shouting and laughing deep within the cave. After spending another night in the cave, Michael stopped cursing me. He just whimpered softly, unwilling to let go of the stub of a candle still in his hand. He drank water greedily. He begged me to tell Grandma everything. He begged, but without much hope. He even apologized for saying I was no longer his brother. We talked more that day, by the dim light of the bulb in the narrow walls, than we had in our entire lives. At dinner, Grandma said that since Michael still hadn't returned, it was time to call the police. The sin of cowardice is the most terrible of sins. And, as you've already guessed, I didn't tell anyone anything. Half the village joined in the search for my brother. I lied, saying I last saw him near the gardens by the woods. They combed through the forest and found our treehouse, but they didn't find Michael. When I went to his cave, he had already used up the last of the candles I'd brought, and he didn't react to my appearance in any way. I thought that something profoundly human had vanished from his emaciated, dirt-smeared face with its bulging, half-mad eyes. It seemed he had been licking moisture off the walls and chewing on clay. I saw traces of nails and teeth everywhere. I told him I hadn't brought him food because that way he would lose weight faster and could escape. Michael agreed indifferently, saying it made sense. When I left, he didn't make a sound, just lay there staring straight into my eyes. Crawling back in the dark with the flashlight, I kept looking at his receding face until it disappeared around the bend of the tunnel. The next day, our gloomy father and tearful mother arrived. I was confined to my room, strictly forbidden from leaving. A policeman and my father questioned me again about what had happened. I hated lying and hated the fact that deep down I was glad to have avoided punishment. But I was still glad. For 4 days, the search continued. Strangers came and went under Grandma's heavy gaze. Finally, in the evening, my mother came to me, hugged me, and said we were going home. In the morning, Dad would drive us to the station. I begged her to let me have one last walk alone, even if just for a few minutes. I snuck to the grotto's entrance and sat there for a long time, afraid to crawl inside lest I dirty the new clothes Mom had brought. From the black hole came faint singing, or rather wordless humming. Deep underground, my brother, alone in the dark, was humming some kind of tune. In the morning, we left. I'm 35 now, with a wife and son. My mother is very old, and I bring her over for holidays. I have no brother, nor a father. He passed away from a second heart attack in 2010. I think he suspected something until the very end. Grandma died in 2003, and no one bought her village house. I visited the place a year ago. The log over the ravine had rotted and fallen. I went down to where my brother's cave had been, stood there. It was just overgrown grass. The memory brought back that strange, wordless melody. And by the way, that wretched old woman knew everything. Our dirty clothes and the dirt in our hair, she had been watching us. I had seen her that day above the ravine. She set only one plate on the table when I returned home. She knew what was happening, but she never liked Michael.